Hi everyone, and welcome to this video where we are going to talk about polarity management, polarity mapping. My name is Al Postma, and I work in Pastor Church Resources. Pastor Church Resources serves pastors and congregations and classes so that they can be as healthy as possible, and in particular in times of transition. I've been a pastor in the CRC for about 10 years. It's a pleasure to have this video today with KC and Dirk. The three of us graduated together with, a whole host of other people, of course, but throughout the years, the three of us have kept contact together and have met. So you get the joy and privilege, we hope, of sort of entering into one of our regular conversations. But why don't I let the two of you introduce yourself?
My name is KC Vande Streek. I'm the pastor of Faith Community Christian Reformed Church in Wyckoff, New Jersey. I've been here for about 7 years, and I appreciate some of the resources that are put out by Pastor Church Resources, and I've been grateful, especially during everything that's been happening the last few months, to hear what other pastors and other churches are doing, how they're working through things. I'm really grateful to have learned lessons from those things and that they've been encouraging for me, and so I'm hoping that this conversation we have will be helpful for others along those same lines.
My name is Dirk vanEyk, and I am the church planting pastor 10 years ago of Encounter Church in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And the church has grown up since those days, and we are now working on starting a new location in the Fulton Heights neighborhood just outside of downtown Grand Rapids Medical Mile. And it's been an exciting journey through this all the changes and the crises, the pandemic, to try to explore what community looks like, what church and worship looks like in an increasingly online age, and all the change and adaptation that's required. So I want to thank these two guys as well for their input and their insight along the way.
Perfect. Thanks, Casey. Thanks, Dirk. So, like I said, we're going to talk about polarity mapping, polarity management. We do have another video through Pastor Church Resources that we put out shortly ago that talks a little bit more about polarity management in a larger version. We'll put a link to that video below. But I just want to give a little shout out quickly. This is the book, in case you're curious, that we often draw on. And this polarity management is something that's sort of a bread and butter for us at PCR. It helps us sort out what some of the tensions are in congregations, and how it's not just a yes or a no or an either or, but how do we reflect what a both and can look like in a healthy way, and explore that tension together. I'm just going to share my screen really briefly because I'm just going to give a really quick overview of polarity mapping, and then we're going to get into the tension between tradition and innovation and how that has been experienced in the last little while, and how that might look moving forward. So this here is a polarity map. I pulled this out of the book that I just showed you. We're not going to look at action steps or early warnings or any of the stuff on the side, but the core of it is the center here. And you can think of the two kind of oval shapes as you want to put something in there. And what we're going to put in here is tradition on one side and innovation on the other. And the whole point of it is these are things that will always be in tension together. We're never going to get away from tradition and innovation, or stability and change. We're always changing, but we're always bringing something with us. And so anytime someone wants to just do one and not the other, you end up often with this tension between the two. One of the things I find really helpful as I've done the polarity mapping in other contexts is to start in the bottom left quadrant. You can see I put the words in there. Sometimes our church is two, and you can listen for this in your own context. It's often something that comes out as a complaint. So it could be like, sometimes our church is too centered on, the liturgy's been the same forever, or sometimes our church is too stuck in its ways, or you hear all these different ways that people complain about the church. But what's buried in that is often the value on the other side. So if you think of it in terms of moving from the bottom left quadrant up to the top right, people say sometimes our church is too something, and at those times I would like it to be more. And what you move then is from the complaint to the value. You know, if someone says our church is too focused on kind of keeping everyone happy with the way things have always been, at those times I wish we were more creative, perhaps. And sometimes we often hear people complaining without understanding that there's a value beneath it. And so helping people express those values can be really important. But at those times I would like to be more safe. What's that?
One of the examples that I might experience in my context would be a frequent insight, let's say, posted negatively, a criticism that our church is too focused on maybe people who aren't here yet, or too focused on people who, you know, we don't know. You know, they're outside of these walls. So that's a criticism, but you're saying on the other side of that, the value that's maybe between those lines is a yearning for more community among the people who are here.
Yeah, so maybe one of the polarities that is going on in that case would be on one side of this polarity map. If I just share my screen again, one side we might have, I think it's in the book as well, the outreach versus in-reach.
Okay.
And I know those are not necessarily the best terms, but you're like for tradition and innovation is what we're talking about today. Yeah. But the outreach and inreach, I mean, it could be if outreach is your tradition, right? Maybe your innovation is inreach. Who knows?
Right.
But at those times, you know, if it was an outreach, inreach, you know, sometimes the church is too focused on people outside. At those times, I wish it would be more focused on the community that exists within. But then you could hear people saying that they fear if we only focus on the people who are in the community, then we become insular, or we become, you know, all these different things. And that would be, if it's an outreach, inreach one, that would be the bottom right. And if we say, well, we're worried that we're going to become too insular if we're focused on ourselves, then people on the other side would say, yeah, but we're not all about ourselves. You know, the kingdom of God is bigger than the church that's currently gathered. And so how do we live into that outreach? In a polarized environment, people tend to live on the bottom. You can kind of hear two complainers going back and forth, and they get entrenched in their position. Mm-hmm. And so someone who's very strongly for tradition looks at someone who's very strongly for innovation or outreach, inreach, or whatever the polarity is. And instead of being able to, it almost feels like a concession. Instead of being able to concede the values, or rather, instead of being able to affirm the values, it almost feels like they're conceding the value, right? Yeah. So someone who's very tradition, it's like, I can't say that I like the creativity, because if I say I like the creativity, it's a way of dishonoring my value of tradition. Mm-hmm. And the person on the other side says, I can't express a value for anything tradition, because it pushes away from, you know, my value of innovation. And so we live on that bottom, and that's where we tend to fight. Whereas if we're on the top and we're living into both, and we move into sort of a greater purpose that we really need both in order to live into, that's where the health, and not just health, but vitality and all sorts of new great things can happen. Mm-hmm. So that's like the very, you know, rough and dirty polarity mapping. So let me just throw it out to you guys. What have you seen in the last little while? How in COVID-19 or before or now, or what you can see coming up, how have you seen the tradition and innovation tension, or change and stability tension show up?
Casey, do you want to take it?
Sure. One of the things that I've seen, and if you go back to your little mapping chart there, Al.
Yeah, I'll pull it up.
One of the things that I think as a pastor maybe I would say, and lovingly would have a warning or would have a complaint saying sometimes our church is too, is for our church of about 125, 130 people, we have quite a few new folks and young folks, but we lean toward the older, and that's sort of our demographic and dynamic, right? That I would say sometimes we're too focused on being a Christian or being someone who wants to live out their faith. What that means is church on Sunday morning in person. And that's been taken away. And so now the question is, what does it look like to live out your faith? And it's opened up some deeper conversations about being a Christian isn't just Sunday morning at 10 o'clock, I sit in the pew with my family. But now the tension is sort of coming back. We all sort of agreed virtual worship. We were told by the governor, you can't worship in person. So that decision's taken out of our hands. We have virtual online worship. But now things are beginning to open up. And so now there's questions of how many people in a space, how many people outside. And so we've asked people for feedback, but what we've decided right now is that we're going to continue to worship on Sunday morning virtually because it keeps most of our people safe. And we're in New Jersey, 20 minutes outside of New York City. So we're in a hot spot. So everybody's on the same board. So there's not a lot of tension about that. But there is this sort of tension of, well, then even if it's on Sunday morning, we want it to be live. So I know a lot of churches that pre-record. I think that's wonderful. And then they premiere. But our church has said we want it all to happen at the same time. So that's what we've done. And now we are getting more people who are starting to say, well, if we can meet in person, if it's 40 people or less, even if we have to wear masks in the building, we want to do it. But there's only a few folks like that. There are a lot more people who are more comfortable and want to meet together, but would be happier to do it outside. So now we're running Sunday morning virtually, the same way that we have been, so that more people can participate in the way that's become normal for us. And then on Thursday evenings, we're doing an outdoor midweek service where we can have up to 100 people outside, social distance and masks. So all of that to say that tension of trying to figure out how do we innovate. Sunday morning and being together and worshiping is still really important, but we have to do it carefully and asking people to talk back and forth with one another and our council to make those decisions. We're seeing the managing of polarities playing out in a very real-time fashion right now here.
How about you, Dirk?
Yeah, I'm going to hit pause on our COVID conversation and kind of go to a classic one around ours. In our ministry context, we have taken significant steps in the last probably 3 years, I'd say, of modernizing our worship experience significantly. And that's been tough. I still hear the comments around those days back at the school. Just for some context piece for some of our viewers, when Encounter started, we launched in a public school cafeteria, and it was cozy. It was like a family, right? I mean, it didn't hurt that like some families are larger than this one, extended families at least, that everybody knew each other. And when we moved out of that building and we bought our own building, it's from my side of things, I was looking at it saying it's universally better. Like, we don't have to set up, we don't have to tear down. I mean, it's our building, for crying out loud. It's in every way better but there was a real loss there that I couldn't figure out. And I think maybe this polarities conversation would have been helpful then, because I'm like, why do you guys want to go back to the school? We didn't have air conditioning in West Michigan. It was like humidity is 100%. Like, it's disgusting. Your kids were on the floor in the hallway. Like, you don't want to invite, it was like, but I don't know, there was this, but that's who the church was. That's who we are, and I'm like, yeah, thank goodness it's behind us now. But I think maybe that's where some of that, the tradition of we are a church where everybody knows each other. We're a church that's scrappy, that kind of gets by on what we have. It's who we've always been, is this church that meets in a school cafeteria. And I'm trying to like lead us into a very modern auditorium style, multicolored, presentation mode, innovated. And we're working on it.
I think one of my hopes, in the conversations that the three of us have had over the years, is I think, Dirk, your church that you're part of would probably be known more as something on the innovative spectrum.
Sure.
And Casey, the church you're part of would probably be known more on a traditional spectrum. And yet, despite all that, both of you still live in this polarity where Casey, you might be a little bit more weighted to tradition, but you're constantly needing to innovate. Even if the church doesn't want to innovate, you constantly need to be innovating. And Dirk, you may be way over on the innovative spectrum, but you still have that stability, and there's constant, and there's tradition that develops very, very quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yes, very, very quickly, and in odd places that you don't totally anticipate. Right? We did 2 innovative moves in the same weekend. Now, granted, they were too abrupt, and we didn't prepare people nearly as much as we should have. But we basically blacked out the entire auditorium for lighting. We made it completely dark for the music portion. And at the same time, we introduced really movement-heavy, multicolored lyric backgrounds. I was very concerned with how the lyric backgrounds were going to come across, and nobody cared at all. In fact, the only thing I heard was from, honestly, some of our people that would have been more on the tradition side of things saying, hey, that was really cool, but we got to talk about that lighting. Yeah, that was the thing that just kind of surprised me. To your point earlier about how Casey and I, the church context might be a little bit different, but the conversations are really the same. We've had conversations around like taking down, I think, Casey, in your context, it was like a projected screen. I think you were moving to large, big screen monitors, and it was all benefit. Like you could see the glass work behind much better. It was the only reason why it hadn't done that originally is because the technology wasn't invented when the screen went up, right?
Right. Yep.
Fundamentally didn't really change anything. It's just better. And for us, it was like, hey, we've, used a lot of different colors on the lyric backgrounds. Now we're going to move to like colored house lighting. Just kind of the same thing. And there's just that resistance there. And Al, you're going to probably give us some solutions on this now on how we can better.
What I think is interesting about these conversations that we're having is, like, Dirk's very forward, like, and encounters it has, like Al, you were saying, the innovative approach. And so Dirk's pushing for innovation stuff, and then it gets blowback when it's traditional. And once people want to be more traditional sometimes. I sometimes think, the congregation's never going to go for this because it's so traditional. And occasionally they'll say to me, well, why aren't we changing this? And I'm like, who are you guys? So you have to be careful, I think, in the managing polarities that the communication constantly in figuring out where folks are at. And just to clarify what Dirk was saying a little bit earlier, so Faith Community Church in their sanctuary, they have a beautiful stained glass up behind the pulpit. And when the technology came out to move to screens, they did it, but they have one drop screen that covers that stained glass, and it's been covered for about 10 or 12 years. We've got 8-year-olds that are running around in the church that are like, oh, that just got here. Like sometimes when we have the screen up, they've never seen it. Well, now the technology is out that it's really affordable to go to dual TV screens, and people are chomping at the bit. So we attached to fundraising for those TVs to renovate the narthex of the space, to renovate other stuff. And even though we're in the middle of a pandemic, we got the approval to do the fundraising. We got 20% of what we needed. We paused the fundraising because we didn't know how everything was going to go. We started up last week, and we're over halfway where we need to be. People really want to see these things happen. And I thought that the church leadership would say, Let's wait till everyone can come back and remember the narthex the way that it has been traditionally so they can see it one more time. And then after we're all back, then we'll do the renovation. And the council unanimously said, get them in there, repaint it, do the whole thing, get it done so that when people come back, it's squared away. So all that, again, just to say, we got to be careful. Dirk's innovative. He's got to make sure that the traditional people have a voice. And I've got to be careful that I'm not just projecting that everyone's going to be traditional all the time. We've really got to communicate.
Interesting. The COVID thing has been interesting too, because Casey, like you, I think to some extent, probably every church around, because of the nature of online ministry right now, it's like our worship spaces, whether you call them sanctuaries or auditoriums or whatnot, they're studios right now. Like we've got cables and cords running everywhere and cameras, and it's just like however many seats we can take out, just clear the path, because we are not spread everything out, and which looks terrible because we've got the sound people, production, they all got to be spaced right now. So where do you put them? You don't tuck everybody in a little booth anymore. And then when we come back, what's that going to look like? And we've talked about how, people are probably really used to the video. And if we keep some of that equipment now sitting out, whereas before we may have tried to hide it a little bit, because it's like, hey, we want to remember, I like what you said, remember how this space was. But then there's also that tension of everybody knows online church exists, man. Most of them are still going to do it even after we come back. They'll be okay if they have to sit next to a camera.
Yeah. Do you think that as neither of your churches are meeting in person currently, correct?
Not on Sunday morning, no. We have
Sunday morning.
Thursday evening outdoor service.
Sure.
It's June 29, 2020 in the pandemic.
Yeah, we should say that.
Today. And so
the pandemic diary.
Right. It's Blur's Day of some year. I don't know.
Today is Monday, guys. It's Monday.
I don't know. It's not Sunday. That's the only way I keep it. So Encounter is currently, last weekend, we did outdoor streamed worship. So we capture it inside the auditorium where our good equipment is, and we can get a good capture, and then we stream it to, I think we've got probably 5 or 6 monitors and speakers set up around the building, around the lawn, to keep everybody really separated out. But it's essentially a watch party. And then the vast majority of people are watching online yet and not in person. We do that at 9:15 and 10:45.
Gotcha.
Eastern time for anybody that wants to check it out.
You're so good at that, Dirk.
Canisters.org.
Yeah.
It's very natural self-promotion right there.
Are there any traditions? I guess the curiosity I have is, what traditions or what things were already in place that you've maintained throughout the COVID time, for better or worse? And which innovations do you think might stick or you fear might go away whatever post-COVID means?
So Faith Community Church here in Wyckoff, New Jersey, there's a cluster of some CRCs and some RCAs out in this area. And we don't have our own evening worship service. We've been part of a rotation, which means that once a month in our building, we host and we provide the worship team, and I'll preach a sermon. And then the other weeks of the month, it's on a rotation to other places. And when all this happened, everyone paused and understand all of that. And I will be curious to see once if that starts up again after all of this is over. And my guess is it will not, because the number of people who are already attending from 5 or 6 other congregations was about 50 people on a Sunday evening. And they're all skewing toward the older demographic, obviously. And so if this goes on like this for another 6 months, 8 months, a year, I'd be very surprised if Faith Communities Church said, we're going to continue to be involved in that rotation. Now, I don't want to put words in our congregation or council's mouth, but it'll be interesting to see what happens with that in about a year.
Can you restate the question? Yeah.
Which traditions sort of held through? Which innovations or changes came about that you maybe hope will hold through or you're glad will be done? You know, one of the things I wanted, like in Casey, your case, but Dirk just as much, I think, is when you can get back together in person, is the hope and intention that it's like we're back to normal. And almost like this was a blip that we can just, you know, I guess what has changed that you think will stick through? But even during the COVID time, what stayed true, even though you maybe thought it might change?
Yeah, somebody was sending around a paper, a blog or something about that, about like how you treat the pandemic as, is it a blizzard, a long winter, or an ice age? And
right.
How you kind of viewing it. And different ministry areas are responding to the pandemic differently. I think some of our, and you just kind of like have to go through ministry by ministry area. I won't like do them all, but worship has been probably the easiest thing to sort of internetize and continue it on. You know, it's been a challenge, but a lot of this stuff was planned already, and this has just expedited that significantly. So it's like, hey, great. That was probably an ice age type of, you know, movement, because it's like, this is normal now. And I can't imagine not doing that. Like covering online church and commenting out, like, if you became a Christian today, or if you've got a prayer request, put it in the comments, private message us, like do whatever, email the people. Like, that's just what we're going to do. We're going to have prayer team on site, not on site, but like, you know, online on site, right? Wherever they are, live, responding to some of the requests and reaching out and contacting people.
What I hear from you, go ahead.
Children's ministry has been a unique on the other side, because it has a really hard time existing solely online. Children's ministry is not an ice age. It has to be, to some extent, like a blizzard, because we can't get by without human interaction. But there's like that hybrid of a long winter, then I would say. So one thing that has been really cool is just some of the volunteers who are saying, I can't see the kids I'm used to seeing and like hang out with them. They're not going to come to me, but I'm just going to drive around and like put stuff on their porch in front of their door and like text mom or dad or whatever that, you know, some, like I put a little gift by there that speaks to them. That's something that I don't think would have happened without a pandemic taking away the Sunday pomp and circumstance. But I also hope it's something that never goes away. Small groups, I thought could weather, if I'm honest. I thought small groups could meet more effectively than they could on Zoom. I don't know if that's other people's experience. I'd be interested in that too. But it just has taken an emotional or an energetic, I guess, toll on people. And I'm not sure where the next form of innovation on that is going to come from. Especially on-ramping new people into groups.
That's tough.
It could kind of sustain, but yeah.
Yeah. One of the things I hear when you talk about, like the children's ministry, for example, is it's highly innovative, but it's also very stable. In the sense that what existed before and is revealed at this time, and you hope continues, is a sense that this is not just a bunch of people who get a curriculum and try and cram stuff down kids' throats, but these are people who care deeply about the kids. And on Sunday morning, that was one way that they showed that care, but that care is part of the tradition of your church.
Yeah.
And you hope that becomes a constant tradition of Encounter Church, regardless of how it's innovated.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, you, Casey?
I like children's ministry.
Oh, no, you already answered the question.
Oh, right. Yeah.
You could talk more though if you want.
No, I'm good. Nobody needs to hear that.
So one of the last things I want to do with you, we're going to close down in just a minute. But I'm just going to share my screen quickly again here. In the top, you see this GPS, greater purpose statement. It's the green box. The greater purpose statement is what tends to happen is people will express the purpose or the values in the quadrants. So people will express the values of tradition or stability, or they will express the values of innovation or change. And you tend to hear two people talking about the values of either one of those. However, at the core, they both reflect a greater purpose together. And that's where we can say, you know, Dirk in your case and Casey in your case, the two of you can have two very different churches, two very different experiences, and yet you're able to say, we both live in this polarity all the time. So I wonder, what's the common thread? And the common thread is not tradition and innovation or change and stability. The common thread is what? Well, I wonder what commonality would there be that reveals itself in the tradition innovation one that we could say is true for either of you. And if we can't answer that right now, we could just leave it like as a hanging question for anyone who's watched this far.
Yeah. We'll do that.
That's good, because I didn't understand the question. Do it one more time. For the simpletons in the back row, do it one more time.
All right. Okay. So the values of tradition and innovation when working effectively together, whether that is at Encounter Church or it's at Faith Community. When the two are working together, what's happening? What's the purpose of doing the work of trying to make sure that the two are working together, that there's stability and change, that there's tradition and innovation? Mm-hmm. What's a value that the two of you could get behind together in your very different church contexts?
Yeah, well, didn't you just name it, right? With the this stability and change, like that's what we're going for. Because otherwise it becomes, you know, when out of balance, then it's like change for change's sake, and it's isolating to people because they're like, I never know what's going on. It's chaotic. Right. And it's hard to experience God through all that, with just trying to figure out what's church going to be this week and where is it and if is it, you know, if it exists. That's very difficult. But at the same time, life, man, global pandemics, we just can't keep on keeping on.
Mm-hmm. Casey?
Yeah, I mean, we still value and really want to have Sunday morning worship together, the fellowship and the unifying effect that it has. But I think perhaps more than in recent years, what we've realized is the church just isn't that alone. And that maybe shouldn't even be the main focus or our main thoughts about what it means to be a follower of Christ. Rather, we should gather together to have that so that we're pushed out to go forward from there. What else do you do? Especially now that you can't go anywhere and can't do much of anything, and you still got to be careful how you do things. The idea of giving up some of your freedom for the health and well-being of someone else, to love your neighbor as yourself. We're in a really wonderful position in our culture and in our society as followers of Christ that we've been trying to practice that anyway. Now let's go live like it. And maybe Sunday morning fuels us to go do that better, rather than we're just completely exhausted at the end of the week from work and we just come to Sunday as a reprieve. Mm-hmm. Maybe we do a little bit more of the pushing out from there.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Yeah, I think that it's powerful to be able to identify like the polarity and the balance to it. Because sometimes there will be people, at least in my experience, who, when it's all laid out like this, it doesn't change the game for them. It's not like, oh, that's why that happened. No, I'm 100% in now, and I love it. And for either side. But what it does do is change the dialogue and changes, I guess, where you can identify Jesus in it all. So for example, when you have somebody who's like, you know, I am sick of all of the changes that keep happening around here, and I'm done. Okay, but with a phone call or with a coffee, and you just talk to somebody about it, you can kind of identify, like, so what I'm hearing, you know, why do you think we do the change? Well, it's always about the people who aren't here yet, or it's not about us, or something like that, right? And then you can kind of identify to, okay, it's too innovative, and it's not of value enough on tradition. But like, that's what it is. It's not whether or not we're Christians or not, or you're a Christian or not. It's just like seeing that and saying, yeah, I think I'm over on this side of this tension, and you're over here. And so I'm going to leave, but can you still, and this is how I've ended a lot of my conversations with some of that like this, can you still recommend Encounter to somebody who is looking for a church home? And then, oh yeah, okay, yeah. I mean, I for sure will. You know, it's this good, positive recommendation. And I think that's some of, like, the benefit of what we get with some of these conversations is to say, just because our tension is a little mismatched, doesn't mean we have to write somebody out of the book of life.
Yeah.
Heavy, but sometimes that's how it feels.
Sure.
Yeah. And I could see just the mutual appreciation develops. Somebody who's innovative, values tradition, somebody who's traditional, values innovation. Because we see that you need both. And not only do you need both, you're going to get both whether you want them or not.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. So I'm going to close out our conversation unless either of you have any parting shots. No? All right.
Everybody stay safe.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Casey. Thanks, Dirk. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Take care.